F model. When I was in flight school 100 years ago, we were talking about which airplanes we want to go get into when we finished our primary training. And my biplane, thanks, sir. My instructor pilot was describing the Chinook to me, and for those of you that don't know, there are 5 transmissions on this aircraft, 5. And he said, here's the way I describe a Chinook to you there, Lieutenant Pillsbury. We have 2 burning, we have 6 turning, and we have 4 praying. So I chose the Black Hawk. But the F model Chinook is one great piece of kit. I had the opportunity to fly one when I commanded Aviation and Missile Command. It is a monster. Very powerful, very smooth. And I'm not going to go into each one of these boxes to tell you what it does, but the point is it's a different aircraft than the D model. And it requires additional training for our 15 Foxes, our 15 Novembers, our 15, every piece of kit on that airplane that our 15 series fixes. Plus, obviously, it takes a transition of about 3 weeks, I believe, for a Fox model, D model pilot to become a Fox model capable pilot. So, what happens? Next slide. I'll take a second to orient you to this chart, but this is the reset, 6 months for AC, 12 months for RC, train ready phase, 24 and 48, and then the available phase of 12 months. There is an error on this slide that should read S5, S3, and S2, and that's what we're going to try to get our units at. But what the D model unit comes back and turns in its Chinooks, not all of them. The D model then is going to go off to Boeing and become an F model after about 7 months, Bill? About 7 months? But they keep a number of airplanes, probably 3, probably 4, for training to maintain the currency of their current pilots. And then we get their airplanes in at the end of reset, the F model pilots that are coming out of Fort Rucker. The D model pilots are going to stay with the unit, will then go down to Fort Rucker at this time to be able to get into their training for F model. And then at this point in time, the unit becomes S1 for Chinooks, which is 12 out of 12, and then it can go into its training either for a CEF mission or a CEF mission contingency force or a DEF mission, deployed expeditionary force. The point there being is we're not going to take these soldiers in reset outside of their post-camp and station to do any directed training for an F model that takes them away from their family. That's the goal. Next slide. And with that, I'll be looking forward to your questions, and I appreciate it. I'll be followed by another Yankee fan, Lieutenant General Bill Phillips.
My name is Bill Phillips, and I am a recovering Yankee fan. Hua. Next chart. I am proud to be here with this panel and also represent the acquisition logistics technology community, especially our scientists and engineers that are working so hard in support of our mission, which is to put capability in the hands of our soldiers. You can see a lot of words on those charts and read through them, but in a nutshell, what we do in acquisition is to put capability in the hands of our warfighters, so at the end of the day, they can be successful on the field of battle, they can execute the mission efficiently, effectively, and one day come home safely to their families and their friends. And it doesn't get much more important than that piece of it. Next chart. If you try to put this into context, it's important that acquisition remain connected to warfighters. If we ever lose our connection to warfighters, we have lost something. And that's important that we have that connection downrange, as well as have that connection back here in the building to warfighters. And that's to be able to put into context how our aircraft systems, like the F model that Jim Pillsbury just mentioned, are being operated downrange, how we can help soldiers and air crews better utilize those systems, and more importantly, how we take those that feedback from warfighters on the front lines of freedom so we can change our programs in a positive way and then provide more capability downrange for our warfighters. So maintaining that connectivity with warfighters is absolutely critical. Second piece, we must understand and know what the threat is. It is not just the threat that we face today, maybe in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's also the threat of the future. So we must stay connected with our G2 and others that deal in this arena so that we can understand the threat and be able to field systems later on that can meet that threat capability. And on the very bottom, the last bullet is we have to continue to look at our processes in acquisition and where it makes sense to reform or to input more efficient and effective processes. We absolutely must do that. General Wagner's here. He is a co-lead for an acquisition study that is ongoing right now. If you heard Secretary McHugh this morning, he talked about the acquisition study, and throughout the sessions yesterday and today, you'll probably hear a lot of folks talking about the acquisition study that's ongoing within the Army today. And we're looking for that as an opportunity for us to have a blueprint to be able to improve our processes, because we have to look at how we can improve processes. And I'm going to show you a chart that shows how complicated things have become on the next chart. But I'll go back to what Mike Vane said earlier. On the last bullet on one of your charts had speed matters. No more important today is our ability to be able to understand what warfighters need and then work to the extent that we can to speed capability into their hands. I want to show you this chart, and that was the aircraft that Jim Pillsbury was talking about earlier, the biplane that he flew with the Wright brothers one time. But this isn't a test, but a question for you. When was the first Army Major Systems contract written? Anybody got any idea? 23rd of December, 1907. It was written by a Captain Charles Wallace, whose father was lead engineer on the Panama Canal. So this captain, Signal Corps, was in essence a contracting officer. He had the Army had a need then, and it was this new aircraft that the Wright brothers were building. So he wrote a 2-page contract, and he sent it to the Wright brothers, mailed it. Took about a week or so for it to get there through the mail. They signed it, and a week or so for it to get back. 2-page contract. And now, if you fast forward to 2007, when I was down with PEO Aviation, we signed a contract with Boeing Mesa to build the Apache Block 3, the world's greatest attack helicopter, HUA. And if you look on the right-hand side of that chart, there's a major with a couple of the copies of the proposal to build that aircraft. So that just gives you a little bit of idea about how complicated our business has become over time. So I think it is time that we take a look at our processes within acquisition, big acquisition, not just the acquisition of the contracting process itself, big acquisition, so we can take a look at what's value added and that we can ensure that we keep the value added processes and the others that we can work on to eliminate in some fashion. Next chart. Delivering capability. These are inherently linked, from requirements to resources to acquisition all the way to sustainment, which, by the way, is about 60% of the cost of a system when you look at life cycle costing. If you look at them in parallel, though, you can't look at them that way. General Chiarelli mentioned the capability portfolio reviews, which is the first bullet on that chart. And after 9 years of war, it's important that the Army take a holistic look at its requirements, what it has built over time, and what's value added to the Army. So as the CPRs are being executed, the acquisition community is right in line with our PEOs and PMs, looking at the requirements that are being validated or revalidated by the Army. And following that, we have configuration steering boards, or potentially an ASARC, where we codify what has come out of the CPRs into a formal acquisition decision for us to move forward in. So I'm going to jump all the way down to the bottom of that chart, and this is what I share with the industry. Look at the products that you're building for our Army today. And if it isn't clearly relevant today or won't be relevant tomorrow, are you working on the right things? Are you seeking to provide our Army with the right kind of capability? The Army's taken a very hard look at our systems that we've developed over the 9+ years of combat and making some very tough decisions. So we ask for your help as we look deeper into this process. Next chart. When I built this chart, and I briefed it for the first time at another AUSA convention about 7 months ago, I realized I had it wrong because I was looking at it like it was linear. You cannot. We in acquisition at the end of this have to make sure that we're in line with the requirements community, and Mike Vane and I are working hard on a number of areas. GCV is one, the improved carbine is another, and there will be many others to follow where we'll have, I think, a stronger link to the requirements community, a stronger link to my battle buddy, Bob Lennox, on the resourcing community, and then Jim Pillsbury and his team at the end of this process on the sustainment side to make sure we get after that 60% of what our systems cost after they've fielded. You can't look at it as if it's linear. Next chart. General Chiarelli mentioned this, so I'm just going to cover some key points on this slide. If you haven't already, I would encourage you to go back and read Secretary Gates' comments at the Eisenhower Library a few months ago, because I think they would have value to you. Also, the 28 June memo from Dr. Carter that soon followed about how OSDA and AT&L was going to go after efficiencies. And here's another message for our industry partners. Look inside your processes for how you're building your products and providing them to the Army or to any of the services. And if there are inefficient processes, either that you own directly or your subs own, we would ask you to take a hard look at them and eliminate the inefficiency. Because at the end of the day, we're looking for about a 2 to 3% gain in essentially our top line for our contracts so that we can put those savings back into the Army and take advantage of that. And there's another comment out that's what we owe the American taxpayer as well. We owe them and our fiduciary responsibility to make sure we give them the best bang for every dollar that they give us to execute. And you can see some of the savings. I think it was mentioned up front. We've got a great start already. We didn't start this the day that Secretary Gates shared his comments with us or the day that Dr. Carter signed his memo. We've been doing this for a while, and we need to stay after it. Next chart. Some of the things we're working on in acquisition. Number one, my number one priority is rebuilding the acquisition workforce. Essentially, it's not providing support for our warfighters, because if we don't build, rebuild, and rebalance our acquisition workforce, we will not have the talent, the experience, the people to execute the programs that we need to put capability in the hands of our warfighters. So the acquisition workforce and what we're doing to build the acquisition workforce is incredibly important. Acquisition transformation, I mentioned, Mr. Gil Decker and General Wagner are leading that team for us, for Secretary McHugh actually, and we're looking for some great value to come back from that. Third bullet I've already mentioned, speed matters and getting capability to warfighters. Probably one of our other challenges that we talk about often is the synchronization and integration of programs. One of our challenges today. We are very good at building programs and executing. We manage over 1,500 programs, and most of those programs are going actually very well. But when you look at what any product is going to do today, it's going to go downrange and be put in the hands of potentially a soldier or another service member, and it's going to operate as a system or a systems of systems. So the integration of those, that capability, is incredibly important. And we need to get better at this part of the business, whether it's WinT, whether it's JTRS, whether it's putting systems inside GCV that incorporates the network. That is incredibly important. Keith Walker is here on the front row. He's out at White Sands with AETF, and they're doing some incredible work out there to allow the Army to understand how better we can synchronize and integrate these programs across our many systems. And the last bullet, I just want to go back to the comments that General Casey shared at lunch today. Maintain the competitive edge, reconstitute our forces, and building resiliency. At least in the first two, we are heavily involved in both of those within acquisition and making sure we build an affordable, efficient, and effective modernization strategy. Thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Well, I can be quick. I think a lot of my points were covered earlier and probably in a better way. But if I can go to my first chart, please. We talked all about affordability earlier. And this chart really is designed to show 2 points in affordability. The external pressures on the entire DoD budget, wherever they come from, the recession, increased mandatory spending. Secretary Gates saw that, and that's why I think the efficiencies initiative started. And his attempt to maintain that real growth in order to sustain force structure, modernization, and all the warfighting enhancements that go with those. But at the same time, there's internal pressures. In order to sustain an all-volunteer force, our military pay programs and the cost of sustaining our end strength continues to grow. The programs that keep families resilient, that keep our installations properly resourced, critical capabilities to support an Army at war continue to grow. All those put pressure on our ability to modernize, to do research and development, and build our capabilities for the future. And that's why things like the Secretary of the Army and Chief of Staff of the Army directed portfolio reviews have been started. And the next chart starts to get at the reason why. There are really three classic collisions that are going on. The first one focuses on military pay. As I mentioned, military pay and benefits have to be increased to sustain an all-volunteer force at war. We have to do the right things by our soldiers. We have to do the right things by our families. At the same time, we have to sustain our end strength. End strength's critical to get balance in the force, to help increase our dwell time, our time at home, and offset it with the time that soldiers are deployed. So there's this classic collision there in military pay. And we don't have a lot of ability to do anything about that inside the Army. The second one has to do with modernization. It's really the need to modernize and grow and keep our forces and our capabilities relevant for the future. At the same time, you have to fight the urge to increasingly build complex and costly solutions. You're not going to be able to do very much modernization if the solutions you come up with are incredibly complex and very expensive and then don't deliver. And finally, the last collision that I see are those that come from fast clock speed industries, IT, robotics, software, changing COTS development extraordinarily fast, and offset with the acquisition process that Bill Phillips showed you about when he showed you that stack of paperwork next to the aviation program manager during his briefing. Our process does not equal our desires. So what are we doing about it? The next chart. The Vice talked about this very well and completely in his talks. Capability portfolio reviews are the first step. And they've allowed us to look at redundancy and save $1 billion per year as we built our next program. It enabled us to look at our basis of issue. We were able to do some innovative things about taking our UAVs and putting more of them forward, more ground stations forward, and retain few of them in the rear. So we didn't have to buy as many of them. So our dollars went further. And then finally, we had to ask ourselves if we're buying the right amount of those solutions for the future, for things like Excalibur. Are we buying for today's wars, or are we buying for yesterday's wars? And that allowed us to significantly reduce the number that we had planned to buy and then save money for other investment. But that's not enough. The portfolio reviews did a wonderful job at looking at the requirements that have been submitted, that have been in existence, but now we have to look forward, and the next chart talks to that. It's an example of our tactical wheeled vehicle strategy, and it starts from the affordable modernization strategy we published in April of this year that talked about the combination of buying new, upgrading the things we have and divesting the old ones, and then fielding systems in an R4 Gen way. When we started looking at things like our tactical wheeled vehicles, we found that we had about $3.7 billion worth of requirements. And that's in our light tactical vehicle fleet, our medium tactical vehicle fleet, and our heavy fleet, as well as buying the new joint light tactical vehicle. And then on top of that, we had to armor this. And we had to armor the capabilities for the war they may find themselves in. And what could we afford? We could probably afford about $2.5 billion a year in this portfolio. We were out of whack. We were out of whack. And we owed it to senior leaders then to provide them some options on how to get the portfolio back into whack. And those we show on the bottom there. We could take our time in buying add-on armor. We think technology is going to change. You don't want to buy it all up front if technology is going to change. So we buy in a rate and pace that we think is a risk worth taking. We look at the rate that we're going to buy the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle. And then how long do you, in between times when you recap your vehicles. And then finally, you've got some options about the number and quantity of trucks that you actually have. We currently own about 266,000 trucks in the United States Army, a $70 billion inventory. And we've got to look at that trade-off in number versus our ability to modernize that fleet. And that's the kind of approach in our affordable modernization strategy we're taking for the future. So instead of having steak months and peanut butter and jelly months, we're looking at average months. How do we set a course and work hand in hand with Mike Vane in Training and Doctrine Command at giving him some guidelines, some thoughts to help guide his requirements development in the future. Not to drive them, but to guide them. And that's our approach now. So step one was capability portfolio reviews, important look at our currently existing requirements. And step two is building the strategies for the future that get at where we're going to go in the future and what we can afford in the future. Now, there's been a lot of concern about affordability, and we don't want to lose the sight of what our job is to do here at Headquarters Department of the Army, and that's to make sure our soldiers have what it takes to fight and win on the battlefield today. So just as a conclusion, I'd like to show my last chart, and it's probably pretty hard to detect from out there, but what we're showing is some of the capabilities today that the soldiers in today's Army have, and this is our most capable Army ever, our best equipped, best trained, and best led force. Up here in the upper left, we're showing the 110 sniper rifle, M110 sniper rifle. A little bit hard to see there, but on his M4, that soldier has the Advanced Combat Optic Gun Sight, the ACOG. Over here, they're wearing medium rucksacks and the new mountain boots that we've given commanders in the field opportunities to choose from. And then on this chart, a lot of options there in terms of plate carriers. What's the right mix and weight for soldiers to carry into battle? Soldier in the back's wearing a plate carrier. I know it's hard to see. And then Mitch Stevenson's in the office. Mitch, raise your hand. Mitch led an effort this last year that focused on some of the uniform choices with PEO soldier. And that soldier up front is wearing the multicam uniform. And that uniform, according to Colonel Randy George, who commanded the 4th Brigade, 4th Infantry Division, made his soldiers disappear in the valleys of eastern Afghanistan. So what we're about today is thinking about the future. We've talked a lot about that. In the midst of all that discussion, I just didn't want to lose sight of the fact that our other job is to make sure soldiers today in the warfight are adequately armed and equipped to be the best Army in the world. With that, ladies and gentlemen, the panel's ready to take your questions. Thank you. Answered them all. This is no fair. General Maddox has had a chance to study us because he's part of General Wagner's acquisition study.
Only 3 weeks.
Oh, okay, sir.
I'm not sure who's the best person to talk to this, but if we're going to really push get new systems in 7 years, we're going to have to go after mature technologies, which I support. But the big issue is, I don't think that system, when first fielded, is going to provide a quantum jump from what we've had in the past. But we've got to be able to introduce new technologies over time and continue to upgrade it. My first part of the question is, how do we introduce in the requirements piece, whether that's requirements out of TRADOC or in the RFP, that the hooks are in there, so that you in fact can introduce the follow-on things at the function of time. And with that, how do we avoid not ending up with a sustainment problem, because we've got 16 versions of this system that may make the sustainment problem even harder. Now, I'm not after these aren't workable, but I think there are 2 challenges in how to deal with a quick turnaround of getting new systems.
I don't know if you wanted to, sir, I don't know if you wanted to start and talk about the M1 maybe.
Whenever I'm looking at this question, I look at the M1. As a tanker, I remember when it was first introduced in Europe in the 80s, we all laughed and made fun of the fact that we said they ran out of money when they got to the commander's weapon station. It mounted a 50 caliber with a butterfly trigger. It had the most crazy hatch I've ever seen in my life. It was a butterfly hatch that you had to be a contortionist to try to get down. It had a shield in front of it. It was really, really, for a tank that offered everything that it offered to a gunner with a computerized system and the ability to hit a target at tremendous ranges, the tank that allowed us to win the Canadian Army Trophy in 1987. It was truly, you know, amazing that the commander's weapon station looked the way that it did. And we laughed that they ran out of money, and when I met one of the designers of the M1 tank, he confirmed that. That was in fact what happened. They ran out of money when they got to the commander's weapon station. That tank today, that was introduced in 1978, that was a competition between Chrysler and GM, with Chrysler winning the competition because Chrysler put an additional road wheel that would allow for expansion and growth of that particular vehicle over time, has been upgraded today to the M1A2 SEP, which has the most advanced commander's weapon station of any tank in the world today. The M1A2 SEP of today is nowhere near the M1A1, including the main gun, which was initially a 105 millimeter gun. It went to a 120 millimeter gun. And we really see, I think it's fair to say, another 30 to 35 years in that vehicle with continued room for growth. So that to me is where we've got to go with that kind of an incremental build. And I could talk through the different models of the M1 tank, but it is over time, because of the way it was designed, because we allowed room for growth, it is proven to be an absolutely amazing vehicle. I think that kind of capability is what we need in the ground combat vehicle and other systems that we go ahead and field.
Mike or Bill?
I think I laid out some of our ideas on how to do this, sir, and we have been following that in some of our more recent activities, as Bill mentioned, where we're partnering more and more now on the front end. And that is to understand the baseline, do a cost benefit that ensures that what you're going to get in that first increment is better than the baseline. Know what you want with a greater level of understanding than the current WSARA or JSIDS requires, which are too broad. Need to have close to 50 to 70% understanding of requirements and costs. Don't trade growth. Make growth a part of the core element. Manage increments driven by technology, threat changes, feedback from the edge, and speed within the political decision cycles of changes in political leadership. And then make sure that procurement and life cycle costs or sustainment costs are conducted early and continuously, would be my view of the answer to that.
Sir, I'll just add one thing, and I'll really jump to your third point because the Vice and General Vane have answered exactly reference incremental build and growth. On the sustainment piece, and I'll go back to the acquisition workforce, it's important that we have the expertise that lies within Jim Pillsbury's organization at TACOM and elsewhere, TARDAC, that allows us to look at the proposals we get back from industry as we run through the evaluations and make sure that we're adequately considering sustainment and life cycle cost across the life cycle of this vehicle. So we get after that upfront and early and have some level of understanding what it's going to cost long term.
And I will close this one, sir, by saying on the sustainment side, one of the things that Mitch Stevenson got done when he was at CASCOM was to ensure that any new major builds has this thing called condition-based maintenance embedded in the frame, and that's sensors that allow us to see the condition of the airframe or the vehicle and see it where possible failures could occur before it does fail, and it's already proven to be very, very, very successful.
I'll ask a question that I need from a study.
So we're going to do his work for him.
We get paid for this.
Well, first of all, I have to smile when the vice told me about the fighting position on the M1 tank. When I took the Armor Center in June of 1980, they delivered the first 20 tanks to the Armor Center, and I climbed in one, Vice, and I said, my God, who was the idiot that designed this fighting position? And so I called up the TACOM commander, and I said, send someone down here that knows something about turrets. And he sent down an old German designer from the German Army. And he could hardly speak English, but he looked at it and he agreed. He had not been involved in it. So he redesigned one for me on paper in 1980, and we put it on when we came out with the M1A1 with the 120. So you really have to connect the user and the warfighter, the user and the acquirer and the PM during that development phase. If you don't do that, you're not going to get what you want. And I would ask this question to General Phillips. How are you connecting your PMs and your PEOs today to the user and the warfighter in the field so they understand what the warfighter is looking for? When I talk on this group, when I've talked to a lot of warfighters, they're not sure that it's properly connected.
Sir, great question. The PEOs and PMs can't do it alone. It's going to take a team effort. And we have ASALT forward operations operating in Iraq and Afghanistan today, gathering feedback. We through RDECOM and through AMC, not speaking for AMC, but I know they have science and technology engineers downrange. We have ATEC folks that are looking at test, operational assessment and test downrange. So the PEO and PM will not have enough people to connect to the user completely, but they should be able to use the talent across a team to be able to gather feedback more proactively. I'll also, looking at Mike Vane and what they are doing at TRADOC, I think we have taken some skills out of TRADOC on the acquisition side and somehow we've lost a connection. And I remember when I was a young captain and major and working with PEO Aviation on a classified project known as AUSA, which became known as Longbow. And we had people inside the aviation center that were acquisition professionals working with us at St. Louis at that time every day on our programs. So I think that we could look harder at how we could help TRADOC in terms of maybe building some additional skills and structure with our acquisition workforce being inside that formation. But it's not simply, I guess my complete answer to you is it's not simply the PEO or the PM. It's got to be a team that they bring together that tries to get a holistic look of what warfighters are doing and then to flow that back into changing